Welcome back to the Distressed Princess, and it's a Distressed Princess Christmas. I went to Goodwill to see if I could rescue some older Christmas items and use them in my home, and I hope I can inspire you to do the same. My first rescue was the sled. I paid $7 for it, and I thought it was amazing that I found this sled because they're not an easy thing to find. So if you do see one out and about, scoop it up. I'll be transforming this whole thing, and the first thing to go was the blue yarn that was the rope. I'll be using the Waverly chalk paint that you can get at Walmart, and I'm using the color Ivory for all my projects today. I painted on 2 generous coats of the Ivory chalk paint onto the parts of the sled that were not the runners, and I also painted front and back. You can use a hairdryer or heat gun to dry the layers of paint in between coats. And I've always just used an old Conair hairdryer. I've never invested in a heat gun. The next thing I wanted to do was make this look like an old wooden sled, so I'm using my Waverly Antiquing Glaze to do this. You need to use the antiquing glaze sparingly, so use kind of a dry brush. I've got a paper towel off to the side to offload a lot of the wax or the glaze before I even touch the sled. So this way, when you go around the edges, then it looks like the white paint is chipping away and the glaze is the wooden part that's underneath. Then I wanted to make the sled look like it was made of wooden planks, so I drew 2 lines to make 3 planks. And then I painted over those lines with the antiquing wax, but that didn't quite satisfy me, so I'll go over them again with something else later. And you can see a little splotch where I dropped some, or I spilled some wax on here, but that's okay because we're going to put the wax all over the top anyway. So you'll see how it all blends in and begins to look like wooden planks. So still with the stencil brush and the antiquing glaze, I'm dry brushing all over and emphasizing the edges. And this is where I decided to go over those first lines I drew with a black Sharpie marker, and that just makes these planks look a little more realistic. And then I repeated this process on the top part of the sled. And this is a very forgiving technique. If you feel like you've gotten too much brown, you can always go back over with more white. And for my sled, I used a lot of brown because I wanted it to be very rustic and old looking. Then I had to decide what color I wanted my runners to be, and I decided to use black chalk paint for those. So it only took 1 coat. This black chalk paint came from Michael's. It's folk art and it covers amazingly well. And I have to tell you, I did like the green. So if you wanted to do green, I thought that would be beautiful too. But here's a look at the difference, a green leg or a green runner and a black runner. So you can tell the difference and decide what you would like to have. Now that's all for the painting on the sled. It's time to decorate, and I'm using some things that I picked up at Walmart and the Dollar Tree. These snowflakes came from the Dollar Tree, and I thought they were a good size to add onto the sled. So I'm cutting 2 of them off of this garland, and I will be painting them up with some plain white acrylic paint. Placement is totally optional, however you want to do it, but I also wanted to put these wooden mittens onto the sled. They were 98 cents a piece. They came from Walmart, and I thought they would be really cute hanging from the top. To attach my mittens, I just used my stapler to staple it to the top of the sled. Then I used hot glue to attach the snowflakes. And I also decided to use a little hot glue to keep the mittens where I thought they looked the prettiest. But I didn't decide to do that until later. Next came the greenery. These are some frosty pine picks that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to cut them apart sprig by sprig with my wire cutters, and then I will hot glue them to the top, and that also hides where I stapled the mittens on. I used a lot of hot glue because I wanted to make sure that my greenery would stay just where I wanted it to, Plus, I'm going to hide that hot glue with another decoration. I have 2 of these crochet lace ribbons from the Dollar Tree. One is a thinner one, which I'm going to use on the mittens, and one is a wider one, which I'm going to use to make a bow to go up there with the greenery. So first with the narrow kind that I'm going to put around the mittens. Very simple. I just used a couple dots of hot glue to hold it in place onto the back of the mitten where it won't show. And cut the tail. And here is the wider crochet ribbon, and there was not a whole lot on this roll. It was just enough to make this bow. I'm going to wrap it around my hand twice so that it will have 2 loops, and then I'm going to take another piece and tie in the center for tails, and then fluff it out. Then use hot glue to attach the bow to the center of the greenery. I used jute string to replace the blue yarn that I cut off for the rope. And here's where I decide to put some hot glue under the mittens to keep them just where I want them. And then I cut my tails a little shorter and at an angle. So here's what I started with, kind of 90s looking sled, and I updated it to a more rustic version that fits in with my decor. I was really happy to find a light up house and a light up church, and I'm going to rework them so that they'll fit in better with my color scheme. I decided to work on the church first because I liked it better, and it was new in the box, and get this, from 1994. So I'm going to paint this church because the red just doesn't go with my color scheme. I'm going to want it to be more neutral, so I removed the light from the bottom, and then I painted the whole thing with only 1 coat of the ivory color chalk paint. You of course can use a second coat if needed, but I felt like the coverage on this was actually pretty good. Now, since I painted the whole thing white or ivory, I wanted the pieces that were snow to look like snow. So I'm using some Mod Podge, and I've got some Dollar Tree white glitter off to the side here that I'm going to sprinkle on to the places where I painted the Mod Podge, making the snow look more realistic and glittery. I wanted to add back in the trees that were on the corners of the church, but instead of painting those trees green, I'm going to use some of my Dollar Tree greenery, and I'm cutting off some stems that were the same size as the trees that were originally on the church, and I'm turning them upside down so that the little limbs or branches are facing downwards, like upside down V's or little triangles. And I felt like this made them look more like little Christmas trees. Another idea would be to use the actual tiny Christmas trees that you get at Dollar Tree. I just didn't have any and was working with what I had. I put a taller one and a shorter one on each corner, and I loved how it turned out. And remember, here's what I started with, and here's my updated, more neutral version. It seems like the last couple of Christmases, Nutcrackers have been a really big deal. So I was so excited to find this one for only a couple bucks at the Goodwill. Someone probably didn't want him anymore because he was missing his staff and he's also missing his nose. And perhaps they didn't like the colors of him like I wasn't really fond of. So I'm going to paint his whole suit and his base and his crown with the ivory chalk paint. I used 2 coats on him, and also I wanted to point out he does have some gold details that if I would have had a steadier hand, I maybe could have kept those details gold and I wouldn't have minded that. But I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do it any justice, so I just went ahead and painted everything white except for his face and hands. I'm salvaging his hair and his beard, so I had to be very careful to try not to get paint into his hair. So here's how he was looking in his new white suit and crown, and now I need to make him a new staff. So I had to get very creative and thinking outside the box. What did I have that could fit in there? And what I came up with was an old paintbrush, and it fit, and it needed a little round head, so I found a wooden bead that could go on top. I didn't want there to be a hole in the top of the bead, so I filled it up with hot glue. Then I painted the whole thing with some gold paint. I could still kind of see the hole in the top of the wooden bead, so I wished I would have filled it up with some clay or something that would have painted over better than hot glue. And it wasn't until the next morning I decided what I could do to fix his nose. I didn't know if I could paint a new nose or look for something to replace his nose with, so I got out my little box of wooden baubles and found one of those tiny clothespins that you get at the Dollar Tree. And it seemed to be the exact perfect size. I just needed to cut it down. And lo and behold, a pair of wire cutters is the perfect thing to cut this little piece in half. I hot glued it where the old nose was, and I thought it was just perfect. So consider using a clothespin if you find any Nutcrackers that's lost their noses. And so here he is before his makeover and after. And although this is not a DIY or a makeover, I did find this St. Nicholas square set of little dessert dishes, and I think it had the wrong sticker on there. I actually paid the $4.74, but these originally came from Kohl's and cost a lot more, and they are still very, very cute. And this is how I use them in my kitchen. So let's take a look back at all my Goodwill makeovers for Christmas, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I felt like Santa working in the toy shop when I was giving these little things makeovers. I sort of feel like consumerism has come to an all-time high, and whenever we can find things in the thrift stores, Goodwill, whatever, and use them instead of buying brand new, it helps to solve the problem. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm so happy you spent time with me today, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye!